sound of a camera shutter clicks. A grainy black and white photograph appears on screen. The image slowly comes into focus. Rows of children with vacant expressions, standing rigidly on the steps of a large Victorian building. In the shadows of forgotten history lie secrets waiting to be uncovered. I'm Dr. Eleanor Pierce from Shadow Frames, and today we're going to explore one such mystery that has remained hidden for over a century. A mystery captured in a single photograph that has haunted those who've studied it. The sound of an old phonograph plays faintly in the background. A popular tune from the early 1900s, the melody scratchy and distant, like a voice calling from the past. The year was 1905. Theodore Roosevelt was serving his first full term as president after the assassination of William McKinley. The Wright brothers were perfecting their flying machine, having achieved their first successful flight just 2 years prior at Kitty Hawk. The Industrial Revolution was reshaping America, with factories springing up across the Northeast, changing the landscape from rural to urban, bringing both prosperity and poverty in equal measure. It was the Gilded Age, a time of extreme wealth for some and desperate circumstances for others. Electric lights were still a novelty in many homes. Horse-drawn carriages shared muddy roads with the earliest automobiles. Women wore corseted dresses with high collars, while men donned suits with pocket watches and bowler hats. Children from wealthy families attended school and played with porcelain dolls or toy soldiers. Those less fortunate often worked in factories or mines despite nascent child labor laws. But away from the spotlight of progress, in the quiet town of Millbrook, Connecticut, stood the Ravenwood Home for Children, an imposing Victorian structure of red brick and dark timber that housed dozens of orphaned and abandoned children. Its Gothic spires and arched windows loomed over manicured grounds enclosed by a wrought iron fence, the kind of place locals would hurry past at twilight, especially when fog rolled in from the nearby river. This photograph you're looking at now was recently discovered in the archives of the Connecticut Historical Society, tucked away in a dusty folder that hadn't been opened in decades. At first glance, it appears to be nothing more than a standard group portrait. 37 children arranged in 3 neat rows on the front steps of the orphanage, accompanied by 4 stern-faced staff members, the kind of formal, rigid photograph common in that era, when exposure times were long and subjects were instructed to remain perfectly still. The date, April 17, 1905, is carefully inscribed on the back in faded brown ink, along with the words, Ravenwood Annual Documentation, Group B. This suggests there were other groups, other photographs, though we've found no trace of them. The photograph was part of a collection donated by the granddaughter of Dr. William Blackwood, who served as the physician for Ravenwood from 1903 until its mysterious closure in 1907. The collection included medical journals, correspondence, and various photographs of the facility, but this group portrait immediately stood out to our research team. For decades, this image sat in a folder, forgotten and unexamined, until we began investigating a series of disappearances that occurred in Millbrook during that time period. Children who vanished without explanation. Children whose names appear in town records and then, suddenly, don't. Our team at Shadow Frames began investigating the history of Ravenwood last year after coming across newspaper clippings mentioning its sudden closure. The articles were vague, citing structural concerns and financial difficulties as reasons for the orphanage's shutdown. But our research revealed that Ravenwood had received a substantial endowment just months before closing, hardly the sign of an institution in financial trouble. When our digital restoration specialist, Michael Chen, began the painstaking process of cleaning and enhancing the image, he noticed something peculiar. The children's faces, all 37 of them, wore the same blank expression, not the typical solemn look of early photography subjects who had to remain still for long exposures, but something more unsettling. Something vacant. There was something off about their eyes, Michael told me when he first brought the photograph to my attention. They weren't just staring at the camera. They seemed empty, like looking into wells where the water had dried up. Michael had worked with historical photographs for over 15 years, including many group portraits from orphanages and schools of the same era. Children in these situations often look sad or scared, he explained. But these kids don't look sad. They don't look like anything at all. Intrigued, we decided to examine the photograph more closely, using modern digital enhancement techniques to reveal details invisible to the naked eye. Michael employed a combination of spectral analysis, contrast enhancement, and digital microscopy, the same methods used by art conservators to uncover hidden layers in paintings. What we discovered sent chills down our spines. But before I reveal what we found, let me take you back to Millbrook, Connecticut in the early 1900s, a town of about 5,000 people, nestled in the Housatonic River Valley, known primarily for its paper mills and the quality of its fishing. The town had grown substantially during the late 19th century as industrialization brought workers to the area. With this growth came social problems, alcoholism, poverty, and, inevitably, orphaned or abandoned children. The existing charitable institutions in the region were overwhelmed, creating the perfect opportunity for someone with resources and vision to step in. Ravenwood Home for Children was established in 1892 by industrialist Thaddeus Ravenwood, who made his fortune in textile manufacturing during the post-Civil War boom. A portrait of Ravenwood from 1895 shows a distinguished gentleman with mutton-chop sideburns and piercing eyes, dressed in the finest clothes money could buy, a stark contrast to the simple garments worn by the children in his care. After losing his own child to scarlet fever in 1889, Ravenwood supposedly dedicated the latter part of his life to caring for orphaned children. He purchased a former hotel on the outskirts of Millbrook and spent a considerable sum renovating it into what newspapers at the time called a palace for the unfortunate young. The facility was considered state-of-the-art for its time, with electric lighting, still a novelty in that era, indoor plumbing, and a small infirmary equipped with modern medical equipment. Images of the orphanage from that period show a sprawling Victorian mansion with multiple wings, surrounded by gardens and a high stone wall. The main building featured a clock tower that could be seen from most parts of town, a constant reminder of Ravenwood's generosity and civic-mindedness. Documents from that period describe Ravenwood as a philanthropist and pillar of the community. His portrait hung in the town hall alongside other benefactors who had contributed to Millbrook's growth and prosperity. He was often seen about town in his distinctive black carriage pulled by two matching gray horses, tipping his hat to ladies and occasionally distributing pennies to street children, always with a photographer from the local paper conveniently present. The local newspaper, the Millbrook Gazette, frequently published glowing reports about the orphanage, describing how the children were well fed, educated, and even taught useful trades that would serve them well in adulthood. Boys learned carpentry, printing, and basic mechanics. Girls were instructed in sewing, cooking, and stenography, all skills that could lead to respectable employment upon reaching adulthood. Mr. Ravenwood's generosity knows no bounds, wrote the Gazette's editor in 1902. The children under his care want for nothing and are being molded into fine, upstanding citizens who will one day contribute greatly to our society. Where others see only society's cast-offs, Mr. Ravenwood sees the future of our great nation. Monthly open houses allowed the townsfolk to tour the facility, observe classes in session, and hear the children's choir perform hymns in the main hall. These events were well attended by Millbrook's elite, who would donate additional funds and supplies while enjoying refreshments served by the older girls, all dressed in identical blue dresses with white pinafores, their hair neatly braided. But behind the carefully constructed public image lay a different reality, one that began to emerge as we dug deeper into the history of Ravenwood Home. We tracked down the few surviving records of Ravenwood Home, scattered across various archives and private collections: death certificates, staff correspondence, town meeting minutes, supply invoices, medical reports, each piece added to an increasingly disturbing puzzle. The first red flag was the unusually high turnover rate among the staff. According to employment records stored in the Connecticut State Archives, few employees stayed longer than 6 months, with many leaving abruptly without explanation. Those who did provide reasons for their departure cited illness, family emergencies, or simply personal matters. This pattern intensified after 1903, when Dr. Blackwood joined the staff and Thaddeus Ravenwood began spending more time at the orphanage, often staying overnight in a private suite on the top floor. Prior to 1903, the orphanage employed an average of 12 staff members: teachers, nurses, cooks, groundskeepers, and a headmistress who oversaw daily operations. By 1905, when our photograph was taken, the staff had been reduced to just 4 individuals plus Dr. Blackwood, and occasional visits from specialists whose names were never recorded in the official ledgers. One letter, written by a former teacher named Margaret Holloway to her sister in Boston, hinted at darker concerns. We discovered this correspondence in a collection of family papers donated to the Massachusetts Historical Society, where it had remained unexamined for decades. My dearest sister, I cannot in good conscience remain at Ravenwood a day longer. The methods employed here are most troubling, and I fear for the well-being of the children. Dr. Blackwood's treatments seem excessive, and Mr. Ravenwood's interest in the children's development borders on obsession. Just last week, little Thomas returned from the infirmary, unable to recall his own name, his eyes as vacant as a doll's. When I inquired about his condition, I was told he had suffered a beneficial correction of nervous excitability. I have voiced my concerns only to be dismissed and threatened with termination. The headmistress who hired me, Mrs. Winters, has herself been replaced by a man named Silas Gould, who follows Dr. Blackwood's orders without question and keeps the children in a state of constant fear. Strange equipment arrives weekly, delivered after dark when the children are asleep. I have heard sounds from the East Wing that no medical treatment I am familiar with would explain. The children who are taken there for special instruction return changed in ways I cannot describe without sounding hysterical. By the time you receive this letter, I shall be on my way to you. Please do not reply to this address. I have already said too much, and Mr. Ravenwood has friends in the postal service who examine mail coming to and from the orphanage. With love and in haste, Margaret. The letter was dated October 17, 1904, just 6 months before our photograph was taken. This brings us back to Dr. William Blackwood, the orphanage physician whose granddaughter donated the photograph. Our research revealed that before coming to Ravenwood, Blackwood had worked briefly at the Connecticut State Hospital for the Insane in Middletown. His tenure there ended under unclear circumstances, though we found a complaint filed by a patient's family alleging he had conducted unauthorized experiments involving electrical stimulation of the brain. Blackwood's personal journals, which we obtained from another family member who wished to remain anonymous, reveal a man fascinated by the emerging fields of neurology and psychiatry. His notes reference the work of European researchers exploring the effects of electrical currents on the human nervous system and the use of various compounds to alter mental states. In one journal entry from January 1904, Blackwood writes, "TR continues to provide excellent conditions for my research. The subjects here are ideal. No family to intervene, no oversight committees to placate, no questions about methods or results. I can proceed at whatever pace seems most promising. The Eastern Wing renovations are nearly complete, and soon we will have a facility rivaling anything in Vienna or Berlin. TR speaks of helping these children, giving them better lives through our interventions. But I suspect his motivations, like mine, are more aligned with scientific progress than charitable impulses. No matter, our goals converge sufficiently for the work to continue." A particularly disturbing entry from November 1904 reads, "Subject 17, James W., responded remarkably to the combined treatment today. After initial resistance, which necessitated increased electrical current, he entered the desired state within 45 minutes. Upon awakening, he displayed no recognition of his name, personal history, or even basic functions, such as eating without instruction. The slate has been wiped clean, so to speak. Tomorrow we begin the reconstruction process. Dr. M. believes we can implant entirely new patterns of thought and behavior, creating, in essence, whatever manner of person we desire from this blank canvas. The military applications alone would justify our efforts, not to mention the possibilities for treating the criminally insane or the morally deficient. Now, let's return to the photograph itself, the image that launched our investigation. When we zoomed in on the image using our enhancement software, we noticed several details that had escaped initial observation. The most obvious was the state of the children's eyes. In nearly every child, the pupils were unusually dilated, even accounting for the lighting conditions of the photograph. These children appear to be heavily drugged, confirmed Dr. Sarah Montgomery, a pediatrician and medical historian we consulted. The dilation pattern is consistent with certain medications used in that era, particularly laudanum or other opium derivatives, possibly combined with belladonna or similar anticholinergic compounds. These would have been readily available to a physician in the early 1900s and were often used in orphanages and asylums to manage behavior, though rarely at levels that would cause such pronounced effects. Dr. Montgomery examined enlarged prints of each child's face, noting not just the dilated pupils but other concerning signs. Many of these children show evidence of weight loss. You can see it in the hollowing of their cheeks and the sharpness of their collarbones visible above their high-necked clothing. Several display what appear to be tremors, captured as slight blurring around the hands and fingers, despite what must have been a relatively fast exposure for that period. But it wasn't just their eyes. Upon closer examination, several of the children displayed subtle signs of physical restraint, faint marks around wrists, visible where sleeves had ridden up slightly, barely perceptible bruising at the neckline. Some children stood with an unusual stiffness, their shoulders pulled back in a way that suggested they might have been bound before the photograph was taken. One boy in the back row, whom we identified from orphanage records as Samuel Porter, age 10, appeared to have a partially shaved head with what looked like a small surgical scar running along the left side above his ear. The orphanage records described Samuel as formerly disruptive, but now a model of appropriate behavior following special treatment for his nervous condition. He had arrived at Ravenwood in 1903 after his parents died in a factory accident, and case notes indicate he initially fought with other children and attempted to run away twice. And then there was the girl in the second row, fifth from the left. Unlike the others, her expression wasn't vacant. It was terrified. Her eyes, while still dilated, contained an awareness lacking in her companions. Her hands, clasped tightly in front of her, were not relaxed but white-knuckled with tension. A barely perceptible tremor in her lower lip suggested she was fighting to maintain composure. We've since identified her as Emily Parker, age 12, who arrived at Ravenwood in January 1905 after losing her parents in a house fire. According to the orphanage records, Emily was described as highly intelligent but difficult, with notes indicating she was resistant to treatment and requires special attention. One entry, dated March 10, 1905, just weeks before the photograph was taken, stated, "EP continues to resist Dr. Blackwood's methods. Increased doses have produced physical compliance, but not the desired mental pliability. Dr. M suggests more invasive approaches, but Dr. B believes persistence with current protocols will eventually succeed." Careful enhancement of Emily's image revealed something else, a small object clutched in her right hand, hidden mostly from view but visible as a corner of something that appeared to be paper. Spectrographic analysis suggested it might have been a photograph, possibly a family memento she had managed to keep hidden from the staff. But the most chilling detail was discovered when we enhanced the window visible behind the group. There, barely perceptible in the darkened glass, was a reflection of someone standing just inside, watching the proceedings. Someone who wasn't meant to be captured in the photograph. The figure was tall and thin, dressed formally in what appeared to be a laboratory coat over a dark suit. Though blurry, the reflection showed long, slender hands and an oddly angled head, as if the person was observing the scene with clinical detachment. A pair of spectacles caught the light, creating two small circles of brightness where the eyes should be. This was not Thaddeus Ravenwood, who was short and portly, according to historical descriptions and the portraits we'd found. Nor was it Dr. Blackwood, who appears at the edge of the photograph, a stocky man with a full beard standing next to the children. This was someone else, someone unaccounted for in the official records of Ravenwood home. Using advanced enhancement techniques developed for forensic investigation, we were able to clarify the reflection somewhat. The face remained largely obscured, but certain features became more distinct. High cheekbones, a narrow jaw, thin lips pressed into what might have been a smile or grimace. In one hand, the figure held what appeared to be a notebook or journal. In the other, something long and thin, possibly a pen or perhaps the handle of some kind of instrument. Michael Chen, our digital specialist, spent weeks working with this small section of the photograph, employing every technique available to modern image processing. "It's like the figure is watching us through time," he said during one late-night session. "The more I enhance this image, the more convinced I am that whoever this was knew exactly what they were doing and wanted no record of their presence." To better understand what might have been happening at Ravenwood, we needed to dig deeper into the historical context. The early 1900s were a time of significant advancement in medicine and psychology, but also a period marked by ethically questionable practices, particularly regarding institutionalized individuals. The turn of the century marked a transition in how mental health and behavioral issues were understood and treated. Sigmund Freud had published his groundbreaking work on psychoanalysis. The field of neurology was advancing rapidly, with scientists mapping the functions of different parts of the brain. The use of electrical stimulation to treat various conditions was becoming more common, though the methods were crude by modern standards. At the same time, eugenics was gaining popularity in scientific circles, with theories about improving humanity through selective breeding and preventing undesirable traits from spreading. In the United States, eugenics found supporters among the social elite, politicians, and academics. Laws permitting the forced sterilization of those deemed unfit Often the poor, the mentally ill, and minorities were being enacted in several states. Orphans, often considered society's unwanted, became convenient subjects for those looking to test these theories. With no parents to advocate for them and few legal protections, they were particularly vulnerable to exploitation in the name of scientific progress or social improvement. Furthermore, the field of psychiatry was still in its infancy. Treatments for mental illness included water therapy, often involving being restrained in ice baths, electroshock, and experimental surgical procedures. Children exhibiting behavioral problems were often subjected to these treatments without consent or oversight. The early 1900s also saw increasing interest from government and military entities in psychological research, particularly in areas related to behavior modification and interrogation techniques. The Spanish-American War had ended only a few years earlier, and tensions in Europe were building toward what would eventually become World War I. Military strategists were beginning to recognize the potential advantages of psychological warfare and enhanced interrogation methods. It was against this backdrop that Ravenwood Home operated, a private institution with substantial resources, minimal oversight, and a ready supply of subjects who wouldn't be missed. Could Ravenwood Home have been more than an orphanage? Was it perhaps a covert research facility using vulnerable children as test subjects? To answer these questions, we turn to the town records of Millbrook. Between 1903 and 1907, there were multiple reports of unusual sounds coming from the orphanage at night: machinery, crying, and on occasion, what witnesses described as inhuman wailing. One complaint, filed by a Mrs. Eleanor Whitcomb, who lived in a house adjacent to the orphanage grounds, described terrible sounds like the wailing of lost souls that would start shortly after midnight and continue until dawn. "The children are being tormented," she wrote. "No natural medical treatment would cause such distress." Mrs. Whitcomb reported that her concerns were dismissed, and shortly afterward, she found her pet cat dead on her doorstep, its neck broken but no other signs of injury. Within a month, the Whitcomb family had moved away from Millbrook entirely. The local constable, James Murray, investigated the orphanage twice following complaints. His reports, preserved in the town archives, are notably brief and conclude that nothing unusual was occurring. "All children accounted for and in good health," reads one entry from February 1904. Dr. Blackwood explained night sounds as steam pipes and children with nightmares. Matter closed. Interestingly, both reports were signed off by Mayor Henry Gladwell, who financial records show received substantial donations from Thaddeus Ravenwood during this period. Gladwell's signature appears on numerous documents related to Ravenwood Home, approving everything from construction permits for the mysterious East Wing renovations to waiving routine health inspections that other institutions in town were subject to. We also discovered shipping manifests showing medical equipment being delivered to Ravenwood, items far beyond what would be needed for a standard orphanage infirmary. Electrical devices with names like neurotonic stimulator and cerebral current modulator, surgical tools from Germany, chemicals with names unfamiliar even to modern medical experts we consulted. One shipment, delivered in December 1904, contained a device described as an electroencephalographic modifier from a company called Mercer Scientific Instruments, a company that, according to business records, existed for only 3 years and had just one client, Ravenwood Home. Invoices showed regular deliveries of pharmaceutical compounds, including morphine, chloral hydrate, and various experimental sedatives not yet approved for general medical use. The quantities ordered would have been excessive for legitimate medical purposes in a facility housing fewer than 50 children. But perhaps the most disturbing evidence came from death certificates. Between 1902 and 1907, 23 children died at Ravenwood Home, an alarmingly high number even by early 20th century standards. The causes listed were vague: natural causes, brain fever, failure to thrive, or simply unknown. More alarming still was what happened to the bodies. According to town cemetery records, only 7 of these children were buried in marked graves. The rest were supposedly cremated, unusual for that time period, particularly in a community that was predominantly Catholic and Protestant, where cremation was still viewed with suspicion. A groundskeeper at Millbrook Cemetery, Harold Jenkins, kept a personal diary that included a disturbing entry from April 1905. "Buried another Ravenwood child today. Youngest so far, not more than 6 or 7 years old. Small coffin, but heavy for its size. Dr. Blackwood insisted it remain sealed, said the child died of a contagious illness. but I heard something shift inside when we lowered it into the ground. Don't think it was just a body in there. Mayor says not to ask questions, but this is the third this month. Something ain't right up at that place. None of these deaths warranted investigation, apparently. None made headlines in the Millbrook Gazette, which continued to publish glowing reports about the orphanage. It was as if these children simply disappeared, their brief lives and deaths unworthy of notice or remembrance. We managed to locate the graves of the 7 buried children in Millbrook Cemetery. 6 had simple markers with only names and dates. The 7th, belonging to a boy named William Hayes who died in March 1906, had a more substantial headstone with an inscription, "Freed from suffering, he rests in peace." When we inquired about exhuming these remains to check for evidence of experimentation, we were denied permission by local authorities, citing historical preservation concerns. Let's return to our photograph once more. Enhanced and analyzed, it now tells a story far different from the one initially presented. These weren't merely orphaned children posed for a formal portrait. They were subjects, experiments, under the control of whatever was happening inside those walls. But what about the mysterious figure reflected in the window? After extensive research, we believe we've identified him as Dr. Julian Mercer, a name that appears nowhere in the official Ravenwood records, but is mentioned repeatedly in Dr. Blackwood's private correspondence. In one letter dated March 1905, Blackwood writes, "Dr. Mercer's approach continues to yield fascinating results, particularly with subjects 12 through 17. The behavioral modifications are holding, though subject 14, Emily P., continues to resist the treatments. Mercer suggests increasing the dosage, but I fear her constitution may not withstand it. Nonetheless, his genius cannot be denied. What we achieve here will revolutionize our understanding of the human mind." Another letter, this one from Ravenwood to Blackwood, dated January 1904, states, "I have secured Mercer's exclusive services for the next 3 years at considerable expense. His work in Vienna proved too controversial for the medical establishment there, but their loss is our gain. The renovations to accommodate his specific requirements are underway. Please ensure all staff understand that the East Wing is now restricted to those with explicit clearance." Mercer insists on absolute privacy for his more sensitive work. Julian Mercer, we discovered, was a shadowy figure in early 20th century neurology. Born in England in 1865, he studied medicine at Edinburgh before continuing his education in Vienna and Berlin, centers of innovation in neurological research. His early work focused on the treatment of hysteria and other mental disorders through a combination of electrical stimulation and chemical intervention. While in Vienna, Mercer studied briefly under pioneering neurologists, absorbing their theories on the structure and function of the human mind. However, his methods apparently diverged significantly from his mentors, embracing a more invasive approach to psychological modification. A paper published by Mercer in an obscure German medical journal in 1901 proposed that the human mind could be reset through a combination of chemical treatments, electrical stimulation, and psychological conditioning. The paper included detailed accounts of experiments conducted on patients at various asylums, though it did not name the institutions. His theories were dismissed as both dangerous and unethical by the mainstream scientific community. After his theories were rejected in Europe, Mercer disappeared from academic circles around 1902, right around the time Thaddeus Ravenwood began the renovations on the east wing of his orphanage. It seems Mercer found in Ravenwood a patron willing to provide both funding and subjects for his experiments. A photograph we uncovered in the archives of the Vienna Medical Society, dated 1900, shows a group of neurologists at a conference. Standing at the edge of the group is a tall, thin man with spectacles and an intense gaze. The caption identifies him as Dr. J. Mercer, London. His features, though younger and clearer than the reflection in our orphanage photograph, are consistent with the figure we observed. But what exactly were they trying to achieve at Ravenwood? The answer may lie in the orphanage's sudden closure in 1907. On April 17, 1907, exactly 2 years after our photograph was taken, a fire broke out at Ravenwood Home, destroying much of the east wing where the infirmary and Dr. Blackwood's office were located. While officially ruled an accident caused by faulty electrical wiring, newspaper reports from neighboring towns, though curiously not from the Millbrook Gazette, mentioned unusual circumstances surrounding the blaze. One account in the Hartford Courant described explosions like gunfire, preceding the flames, and strange blue lights, seen in the windows of the east wing moments before the fire was visible. A witness, who asked not to be named, reported seeing men in dark suits removing boxes and equipment from the building hours before the fire started. 3 days after the fire, Thaddeus Ravenwood left Millbrook, reportedly to seek treatment at a sanitarium in Switzerland for nervous exhaustion. He never returned to Connecticut and died overseas in 1910. The death certificate, issued by a Swiss clinic, lists the cause as heart failure, though rumors persisted in Millbrook that he had taken his own life. Dr. Blackwood relocated to Boston, where he opened a private practice specializing in nervous disorders. His patient records from this period, which we were able to partially access, show a clientele consisting mainly of wealthy individuals suffering from conditions like moral lassitude, hereditary weakness, and nervous excitability. Vague terms that could describe anything from depression to schizophrenia. His treatments involved unspecified electrical therapies and regular doses of sedatives. As for Dr. Mercer, he seemingly vanished from record entirely. No death certificate, no further publications, no immigration records showing departure from the United States. It was as if he ceased to exist after the Ravenwood fire. The remaining children, only 19 by this point, were transferred to other institutions across Connecticut. And here's where our story takes another turn. We managed to track down records for these transferred children through a combination of orphanage transfer documents, hospital records, and death certificates. Most died within 2 years of leaving Ravenwood, with causes ranging from tuberculosis to heart failure to suicide, but 7 survived into adulthood. Of these 7, 6 spent the remainder of their lives in various asylums and mental institutions. Their medical records describe symptoms including catatonia, extreme dissociative states, paranoid delusions, and periodic violent outbursts. Several were subjected to lobotomies and other invasive procedures meant to cure their conditions. One boy, Robert Collins, was transferred to Hartford State Hospital, where he remained until his death in 1972 at age 79. His medical file includes notes from numerous doctors over the decades, all puzzled by his condition. He alternated between periods of complete catatonia, during which he would stare at walls for hours without blinking, and episodes of extreme agitation where he would scream about the wires in my head and Dr. M's machines. During the 1940s, he was subjected to over 200 electroshock treatments and a prefrontal lobotomy, neither of which improved his condition. Another child, Mary Wilson, was eventually released from institutional care at age 21 but was found dead in her apartment just 3 months later. The coroner ruled it suicide. She had ingested a fatal combination of sleeping pills and alcohol. A note found beside her body read simply, "They're still in my head. I can hear them talking. I can't live like this anymore." Only one of the transferred children went on to live what might be considered a normal life, Emily Parker, the girl whose terrified eyes had caught our attention in the photograph. After leaving Ravenwood, Emily was sent to St. Catherine's Home for Girls in Hartford, a Catholic institution known for its strict but conventional approach to child care. Unlike the other transferred children, she exhibited no severe psychological symptoms, though reports describe her as withdrawn and prone to nightmares. At 18, Emily left St. Catherine's and eventually married a shopkeeper named Thomas Bennett. They had 2 children and lived quietly in Hartford until her death in 1972 at age 79. Ironically, the same year Robert Collins died in the state hospital across town. What makes Emily's case particularly interesting is that she left behind a journal, currently in the possession of her granddaughter, Marion Thorne, who generously allowed us to examine it. The journal is a simple leather-bound book with yellowed pages, many blank, as if Emily struggled to commit her thoughts to paper. Most of the entries contain mundane accounts of daily life: cooking, cleaning, caring for her children, working in her husband's shop. But scattered throughout are references to her time at Ravenwood. These passages are often fragmented and written in a different handwriting than the rest of the journal, as if Emily entered an altered state when recalling these memories. One entry from 1935, written in shaky script that slants across the page, reads, "I dreamed of the basement again. The cold table, the straps, Dr. M standing over me, his face hidden behind that horrible mask. Your mind belongs to science now, Emily," he would say. "Let us in. Let us see what's inside." But I never did. I kept a part of myself hidden away where they couldn't find it. The others couldn't do that. The others let them in. And once they were in, they could never get out again. Samuel was the first to go completely. I watched it happen. One day he was still Samuel, scared and sad but still himself, and the next, he was empty, a shell. Dr. B said Samuel was cured of his antisocial tendencies, But Samuel wasn't cured. Samuel was gone. Only his body remained. Another entry, dated 1943, during the height of World War II, shows a different kind of distress. Thomas asked about the scar behind my ear again. I told him it was from a childhood accident. How could I explain what they did to us at Ravenwood? The wires, the currents. Dr. B said it would help us forget our trauma, make us better. But it wasn't about helping us. It was about changing us, controlling us, making us into something else. I heard on the radio today about experiments the Nazis are conducting on prisoners. It made me physically ill. Thomas thought it was just the news of war atrocities upsetting me, but it was the familiarity, the methodology, the cold clinical approach to human suffering. I recognized it immediately. What Dr. M did to us at Ravenwood wasn't so different. I wonder if he's in Europe now, if his work at Ravenwood was just the beginning. I wonder how many others have suffered under his care, believing they were being helped when they were actually being unmade. In 1952, a particularly distressed entry appears, the handwriting nearly illegible. The headaches are getting worse, the dreams more frequent. I see Dr. M's face when I close my eyes. I hear his voice when the house is quiet. The process was never completed, Emily. You're still mine to finish. Sometimes I wake up to find myself standing in front of the mirror, my fingers tracing the scar behind my ear. Sometimes I catch myself staring at my children while they sleep, my hands hovering over them, as if some part of me wants to. No, I would never. I am still myself. I am still Emily. Whatever they put inside me at Ravenwood doesn't control me. It doesn't. Perhaps the most disturbing entry comes from 1967, just 5 years before Emily's death. I saw him today, Dr. M. He would be ancient now, but the man I saw looked just as he did in 1905. Same tall, thin frame, same way of tilting his head, as if listening to something no one else could hear. He was watching my granddaughter at the park. When our eyes met, he smiled and tipped his hat, then walked away. I wanted to scream, to run after him, but my body wouldn't move. The old programming, still there after all these years. I called Marion's mother immediately and told her to bring my granddaughter home. I will tell them we're going on a trip. We need to leave Hartford. He's found me, and I know what he wants. The work never ended. It just went underground. Marion Thorne informed us that shortly after this entry, Emily indeed took her and her mother on an unexpected trip to Maine, where they stayed for nearly a month in a remote cabin owned by a friend of Emily's late husband. When they returned to Hartford, Emily seemed more at ease, though she installed additional locks on all doors and windows of their home and insisted that Marion never go to the park alone again. Grandmother was always different, Marion told us during our interview. She had these episodes where she would stare into space, completely unresponsive, sometimes for hours. Then she would snap back and not remember anything. She was terrified of doctors, hospitals, and especially psychiatrists. My mother wanted her to get help, but she refused until the day she died. Marion also showed us a small box that Emily had kept locked in her bedroom closet. Inside was a child's hair ribbon, a small photograph of what appeared to be Emily's parents, and a folded piece of paper with a strange symbol drawn on it, a triangle with an eye in the center, similar to the one we would later discover in the corner of the orphanage photograph. She made me promise that if anything happened to her, I would burn this box without opening it, Marion said. But after she died, I couldn't bring myself to destroy what might be her only connection to her past. Now I wonder if I should have honored her wishes. What are we to make of Emily's journal entries? Are they the traumatic recollections of a woman who endured unimaginable abuse as a child? Or is there something more to her claim of seeing Dr. Mercer decades after he disappeared from record? To answer this question, we return to the photograph that started our investigation. Using the most advanced facial recognition and age progression software available, we created a composite of what Dr. Mercer might have looked like based on his reflection in the window and descriptions from historical documents. We then compared this composite to photographs and film footage from Hartford in the 1960s, particularly around the park Emily mentioned in her journal. Working with archivists from the Hartford Historical Society, we gained access to newspaper photographs, home movies donated to the society, and official city records that included images from public events. While far from conclusive, we found 7 potential matches, men who bore a striking resemblance to our Mercer composite. The image quality varies, and in most cases the individuals are in the background, not the intended subjects of the photographs. One of these men appears in the background of multiple photographs taken at public events between 1961 and 1969. In each, he is observing the crowd, never directly engaging with others. In 3 of these photographs, children are prominently featured: a school chorus performance in 1961, a playground opening ceremony in 1965, and a children's hospital fundraiser in 1968. The man is consistently well-dressed in a dark suit and tie, tall and thin with the same posture we observed in the reflection. In the clearest image, from the 1968 fundraiser, he appears to be in his 50s or early 60s, much younger than Mercer would have been if he had aged normally from 1905. Could this actually be Julian Mercer, somehow still alive and active decades after Ravenwood closed? The rational explanation would be that this was a descendant or a coincidental look-alike, but certain details give us pause. In one photograph from 1964, taken at a city council meeting discussing youth programs, the man is carrying a distinctive silver-handled walking stick. We found a mention of just such an item in a letter from Dr. Blackwood to Thaddeus Ravenwood in 1905. Dr. Mercer's silver-handled stick continues to terrify the children. He need only tap it against the floor, and even the most recalcitrant subject falls immediately into line, a remarkable demonstration of conditioning. Furthermore, in all these photographs, the man seems to be observing rather than participating, studying human behavior from a distance with clinical detachment. It's the same posture, the same tilt of the head we observed in the reflection from 1905. Is it possible that whatever experiments were conducted at Ravenwood yielded results beyond what conventional science would consider possible? Results that somehow extended Mercer's life or preserved his appearance well beyond normal limits? Without concrete evidence, we can only speculate. But Emily Parker's journal suggests she believed the threat Mercer posed was very real and ongoing. This brings us to the final mystery of the Ravenwood photograph. What happened to the other children? The ones who didn't survive the transfer or spent their lives institutionalized? Enhanced examination of their faces in the photograph reveals something we initially missed. In many of the children, particularly those noted in Blackwood's correspondence as subjects 12 through 17, there is a small, almost imperceptible mark behind the left ear, in the exact location where Emily Parker described having a scar. Using advanced image processing to enhance this area, we found what appears to be a small surgical scar on at least 11 of the children. The mark is consistent across these subjects. A curved incision approximately 1 inch long, partially hidden by hair, but visible when specifically sought out. According to neurosurgeons we consulted, this area of the brain, the temporal lobe, is associated with memory, emotion, and sensory processing. Surgical intervention in this region could potentially alter personality, emotional responses, and even consciousness itself. If someone in 1905 was conducting brain surgery in this region, they were far ahead of established medical practice, noted Dr. Richard Stein, a neurosurgeon at Johns Hopkins University who reviewed our findings. The precision implied by these consistent incision sites suggests sophisticated knowledge of neuroanatomy that wouldn't become common until decades later. And without modern anesthesia, antiseptic techniques, and surgical tools, the risk to the patients would have been extreme. Dr. Stein also pointed out another disturbing possibility. The location is consistent with where we would now place certain types of neural implants. Of course, nothing like that existed in 1905, or shouldn't have existed. But if someone was experimenting with placing foreign objects or substances in contact with the brain, particularly in this region, it could explain the profound personality changes described in the records. Was this Mercer's goal? To literally rewire human consciousness? And if so, to what end? The final piece of our puzzle comes from a source we least expected. While researching Thaddeus Ravenwood's business ventures, we discovered that his textile factory in Millbrook manufactured more than just ordinary fabric. Government contracts from 1904 show orders for specialized material for use in confidential military applications. These contracts, discovered in the National Archives among records relating to early 20th century military procurement, were classified until 1978. They describe a signal-blocking textile developed by Ravenwood Industries that could prevent the transmission of certain electromagnetic frequencies. The material was ordered in small quantities for what was described as field testing. What makes this discovery particularly intriguing is that Ravenwood had no background in electrical engineering or physics. His textile business had previously focused on conventional fabrics for clothing and upholstery. The sudden shift to specialized military materials coincided with the arrival of Dr. Mercer at the orphanage. Further investigation revealed connections between Ravenwood and early psychological warfare research. A classified memo from 1906, now declassified and available in military archives, makes reference to the Millbrook Protocols and their potential application in manipulating enemy combatants through non-conventional means. The memo, written by an Army colonel named James Whitcomb, possibly related to the Mrs. Eleanor Whitcomb who complained about noises from the orphanage, states, Dr. R's demonstration last month was most impressive. The subject responded to verbal cues without hesitation, performing actions that would normally be considered contrary to human nature, including potential self-harm. When questioned afterward, the subject had no recollection of the event. If these results can be replicated consistently, and the method of induction simplified for field use, the strategic advantages would be considerable. It seems that what began as Mercer's radical approach to treating psychological trauma evolved, or devolved, into something far more sinister, an attempt to create techniques for mind control, funded initially by Ravenwood's private fortune but later potentially supported by government interests. The children at Ravenwood weren't simply patients or subjects. They were prototypes for a technology of influence and control that had implications far beyond the medical field. The vacant stares in our photograph weren't just the result of sedation. They were evidence of personalities systematically broken down and reconstructed to respond to external commands. Emily Parker's resistance, the awareness in her eyes that caught our attention, may explain why she alone among the transferred children was able to lead a relatively normal life. Whatever process Mercer and Blackwood subjected the children to, Emily somehow maintained a core of selfhood that couldn't be erased or reprogrammed. The fire that destroyed Ravenwood's East Wing likely eliminated much of the evidence of what occurred there. Whether it was set deliberately to cover up these activities remains unknown. But the timing, just as military interest in the Millbrook Protocols was growing, suggests an effort to obscure the connection between the orphanage experiments and their military applications. Perhaps the work was simply moving to a more secure, less public facility. Perhaps some aspect of the experiments had gone wrong, creating results too dangerous or unpredictable to contain. Or perhaps, as Emily's journal suggests, the work never really ended, but continued in the shadows for decades. Let's return one final time to our photograph. 37 children, 4 staff members, and one reflection, Dr. Julian Mercer, watching from the shadows. Of these 42 individuals, we can account for the fates of only 11. The rest vanished into history, their stories untold, their experiences at Ravenwood taken to their graves. But the photograph remains, capturing a moment when the boundary between care and cruelty, science and sadism, was not merely crossed, but deliberately obliterated. What lessons can we draw from this dark chapter? Perhaps that the most vulnerable among us, children without families, without advocates, have often borne the brunt of humanity's most unethical impulses. That progress, when divorced from morality, can lead to unspeakable harm. That history's shadows often conceal truths we find difficult to face. As for Ravenwood itself, the property remained abandoned for decades after the fire. Local legend held that the ruins were haunted, with residents reporting strange lights and sounds coming from the site, particularly on April 17th, the anniversary of both the photograph and the fire. Children were warned to stay away, and several teenagers who ventured onto the property at night reported disturbing experiences. Sudden disorientation, unexplained anxiety, and in one case, temporary amnesia. In 1963, the ruins were finally demolished to make way for a highway expansion project. Construction workers reported finding unusual equipment in the sealed basement, machinery that, according to one worker, looked more like something from a mad scientist's laboratory than an orphanage. The equipment included glass tubes, electrical components unlike anything in common use, and what was described as a chair with restraints and a metal headpiece. These items were removed by men in unmarked vehicles before they could be properly documented or examined. When local reporters inquired, they were told the items were historical medical equipment being transferred to a museum. No such transfer was ever recorded, and no museum has acknowledged receiving artifacts from Ravenwood. Today, nothing remains of Ravenwood Home for Children except our photograph and the scattered documents we've assembled in our investigation. The highway passes over where the orphanage once stood, the daily traffic oblivious to what occurred beneath. But perhaps something of Ravenwood's legacy persists in less tangible ways. The techniques pioneered there, the intersection of chemical, electrical, and psychological approaches to altering human consciousness bear striking similarities to methods developed decades later in various classified programs that have since come to light through declassified documents and congressional investigations. The triangle and eye symbol we found in the corner of the photograph and among Emily's possessions has appeared in connection with several of these programs, though its specific meaning remains unclear. Some researchers suggest it represents the all-seeing eye of those who sought to observe and control the inner workings of the human mind. And what of Dr. Mercer? If Emily Parker's journal is to be believed, his work continued long after Ravenwood closed. The man she spotted in Hartford in 1967 may or may not have been him, but her fear was undeniably real. Marion Thorne, Emily's granddaughter, shared one final piece of information with us. After Emily's death in 1972, Marion received an anonymous letter offering condolences. The handwriting matched samples we had seen in Mercer's notes from 1905. The letter contained just one line: "She was the only one who got away." The postmark was from a small town in New Hampshire. When Marion tried to investigate, she found the return address led to an abandoned property formerly owned by a research foundation that had been dissolved in the 1980s after allegations of ethical violations involving human subjects. Our investigation of the Ravenwood photograph ends here, with more questions than answers. We may never know the full extent of what occurred within those walls, or whether the experiments conducted there influenced subsequent research in psychology, neurology, or military applications. What we do know is that 37 children posed on those steps in 1905, their eyes vacant, their minds and bodies subjected to unimaginable procedures in the name of science and progress. Only Emily Parker escaped with enough of herself intact to lead something resembling a normal life, and even she carried the scars, both physical and psychological, until her death. As for the others, they remain frozen in our photograph, their stories incomplete, their suffering unacknowledged. In enhancing this image, in bringing their faces into sharper focus, perhaps we've done something to restore their humanity, to ensure that what happened at Ravenwood isn't entirely lost to history. Before we end, I'd like to address one final detail. In the far corner of the photograph, partially obscured by shadow, there appears to be some kind of inscription or symbol carved into the stone of the orphanage steps. Enhanced and isolated, it resembles an eye within a triangle, similar to the symbol later adopted by certain government research programs in the mid-20th century. Coincidence? Perhaps. Or perhaps evidence that what began at Ravenwood extended far beyond its walls and well beyond the early 1900s. The truth, like the children of Ravenwood, remains somewhere in the shadows, visible only when we look closely enough, when we dare to enhance the darkness and confront what waits within. This has been Dr. Eleanor Pierce for Shadow Frames. Remember, history's secrets are often hidden in plain sight, captured in a flash of light, preserved on paper, waiting for someone to look more closely. If you found this investigation interesting, please subscribe to our channel for more explorations of history's hidden mysteries. Until next time, keep questioning, keep looking deeper. The sound of a camera shutter clicks once more as the screen fades to black.